This Detroit News Podcast is brought to you by Varsity Ford of Ann Arbor.
For 44 years, Varsity Ford in Ann Arbor has been more than just a dealership. We're a family, proudly serving yours. As one of the top volume Ford dealers in the world, we're proof that when you treat people right, they come back, generation after generation. And now we make it easier than ever with complimentary pickup and delivery for both sales and service. So you can buy or service your Ford without leaving home. Varsity Ford, driven by family, built on tradition.
I'm excited to get out there. I'm excited to see the city, and how our home games are going to look. Get our first home win since I've been here. So it's a lot to be excited about. Watching these games this last week it's getting me anxious. I'm just fired up, man. I watched the intros for our team last year, and I'm just fired up, man. It's going to be fun.
Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to this playoff edition of the Injury Room, a Detroit Pistons podcast brought to you by Varsity Ford of Ann Arbor. And as always, I'm your host, Pistons beat writer at the Detroit News, Coty Davis. Please remember to follow me on all your social media platforms at Coty Davis _24. Once again, that's Coty, COTY DAVIS _24. And of course, I'm here with my co-host, Tarohn. What's going on, my brother? How you doing today?
What's going on, Coty? I'm happy to be back. Happy for the playoffs. I'm fired up. It didn't really sound like Cade was too fired up, to be honest. He
ready to go for real. He's ready to go for real. I played that video for a reason.
Right. He always calm, cool, and collected. But make sure you guys follow me on all social media platforms at Tarohn Finley, TAROHN FINLEY. Once again, TAROHN FINLEY. And as always, I'm ready to talk Pistons playoffs basketball with you, Coty.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And look, we are recording this podcast a little under 24 hours before the Pistons open the first round at LCA on Sunday. Tip-off is at 6:30. The play-in is over, and we know who the Pistons will play in the first round, and it's going to be the Orlando Magic. They had an opportunity to secure the 8th and final seed in the Eastern Conference with their play-in victory on Friday with a 121-90 victory over the Charlotte Hornets. By the way, by the time that game started, 3 minutes in, that game was over. Tarohn, you know how I feel about the Hornets. You know how I feel about a particular point guard who stars for that organization. Let's just say I am happy I don't have to watch him play basketball for 2 weeks. But with all that being said, on this latest installment of the Injury Room, man, we're literally going to just give our thoughts on the first round series. We're going to just look at what matchups we are excited about and whether or not we expect the Pistons or how we expect the Pistons to move on to the second round. So, Tarohn, let's get things started, man. Really quick, some background information about this series. Pistons and Magic, they went 2-2 throughout the regular season. There was games where there was 100% healthy. There was games where there wasn't 100% healthy. As a matter of fact, the last time these two teams squared off, it came with a Magic victory over the Detroit Pistons. I had an opportunity to ask Coach JB Bickerstaff, about that game because let me give y'all some background information. Because the Pistons were the number one seed in the Eastern Conference, we know them and the Boston Celtics had to wait for the play-in tournament to be over before they knew who their first round opponent was. So this whole entire week, every single day when the Pistons had practice, it was kind of weird because they knew what they had to do in order to clean up some of the slippages, clean up some of the mishaps that we saw throughout the last 15 to 20 games. Coach JB Bickerstaff said he definitely made a list of things that he saw during those last 15 games of the regular season, and that's what they really honed in on in hopes of cleaning that up heading into the playoffs. However, it was kind of a tricky situation in a sense because even though that they was preparing for the playoffs, they still did not know who they was going to face all the way up until Friday night. Here is what Jalen Duren had to say about this experience.
Yeah, it's been unique. I think it's been different just not knowing. I mean, like we're going through different actions and different steps of life. with certain teams or whichever through Orlando or Charlotte, like going through some of their plays, both of them. Some stuff Orlando do, some stuff Charlotte would do, how they regard us, both different teams. So I think that's the only way it's been different. But in terms of the work and like everybody's mindset, still sharp no matter who we play. We're just trying to get the job done.
Tarohn, let's jump right into it, man. What are your thoughts about the Pistons' first round series against the Magic?
Yeah, honestly, going into the series, I remember we did a few weeks back. What team do you think the Pistons most want to play? And I picked the Magic just because, like I said, at the time, we had never really seen them healthy. But I kind of want to take it back in some ways after seeing what they did to the Hornets last night. I just haven't seen that from the team this year. And I have been, watching them do different points in the season. I remember for Yahoo, I wrote an article about this same Orlando Magic team giving up a 31-0 run at one point. That was only like a month or so ago. But to be honest, I think this Magic team is ready to go. They have playoff experience. I still think the Pistons are going to win in, like 6 games, maybe 5 if they play how we've been seeing them play throughout the playoffs. Throughout the regular season. But to be honest, like I said, that they played great yesterday. They moved the ball, looked really connected on defense. And to me, like, I don't know what went into that performance. I don't know if like Mosley is feeling a hot seat in some ways, but I think this will be a pretty competitive series. So that's my initial thoughts heading into it.
It's definitely going to be a competitive series. And I said this over at the Detroit News, and I will 100% agree with this. I think that this is going to be the most physical series, and I think this is going to be the number one series where it's going to feel like old school playoff basketball, whether that look like in the 80s, whether that look like in the 90s, or whether that look like in the 2000s. I think this might could be the lowest scoring series of all the teams in the first round, because at the end of the day, neither one of these teams can shoot very well. They like to play inside out. And look, we all know that Paolo and Cade both can go off at any particular time for 30 and 40 points. Same thing for Jalen Duren as well. But we all know at the end of the day, this is going to be one of those slow, rugged, drawn out series. And Tarohn, I'm not going to go as far as to say that I'm nervous about this series, but I think every single game is going to be close, because I understand that the Magic did not live up to their regular season expectations. I mean, if we go back to where both of these teams were projected, some people would have predicted a first round series between the Magic and the Pistons. However, they would have projected the Magic being the number 1 seed and the Pistons being the 8th seed. After they made that trade for Desmond Bane, there was a lot of expectations that, okay, this is finally the opportunity, the moment that Orlando is going to have to get back to championship contention, a place that they haven't been almost just as long as the Pistons, because they haven't been nothing since Dwight Howard left, so to say. But, they came into the season with a lot of expectations. However, the number one thing about the Magic that I've saw throughout this entire season is the fact that they are inconsistent. You can have a game like they had against the Charlotte Hornets on Friday. As a matter of fact, they back was against the wall. They all know if they did not win, they was going to go home. However, if you go back, 2 days earlier, what was that, Tuesday night or Wednesday night when they played against the Philadelphia 76ers, they look terrible. They didn't look like a playing team. They look like a lottery team, especially from your franchise player in Paolo Banchero. And I know some people might hear that statement and think to themselves, well, Coty, you're only looking at literally 2 games. No, this is something that they have been doing for all 84 games throughout the season, including the 2 in the play-in. Plain and simple. There's been moments where they've been on a 5, 6, 7, 8 game winning streak. There's been moments where they've been on a 5, 6 game, 7 game losing streak. There's been moments where they look like they could be championship contenders. There have been moments where they look like they gave up on Coach Jamal Mosley and ready to just give up on the season and go into the lottery and see what you can get. Like, there have been so many up and down moments for this team. I think that's where it's going to be the biggest difference between the Pistons getting out of this first round series against them, because everything that we have seen from Orlando, the bad, is part of the reason why I'm going into this series confident, because we have seen the Pistons be consistent for 82 games. We have seen the Pistons play strong and play hard for Coach JB Bickerstaff. We have seen the Pistons on so many occasions, even in games where you like, you know what, this might be one of those nights where they fall short, they still find a way to win, versus the Magic, where it seemed like on a lot of occasions they find a way to lose.
Right. I agree with that. I agree with pretty much everything you were saying. This team has been together longer. I would say outside of Desmond Bane, like this group has been together, been in playoff series. But the thing that people are, knocking the Pistons about playoff experience, things like that this Magic team hasn't been outside the first round with, these group of guys, Paolo, Franz, Jalen Suggs, guys like that. The only thing that I am worried about if I'm the Pistons is, like I said, that they do have a little bit of experience. But like you said, it's been a lot of up and down. This felt like a roller coaster season. But just we haven't seen this team healthy, and it looks like they're healthy. Everyone from Franz, Paolo. Paolo looked great yesterday, especially in that first quarter. Very decisive with his decision-making, which I think has been a trouble of his. I would say, like, sometimes he's, a little hesitant to shoot. Sometimes he can shoot too much. But yesterday he looked in control throughout the game, I would say. And another thing is that kind of concerns me as a Pistons, looking at the Pistons matchup against this team is the rotation. We have to see what the rotation looks like. The Magic, I feel like they know who their top 6 guys are. Those are the starters and Anthony Black, who's having a breakout season. So I think that's something I'm going to be interested to watch. And you nailed it on the head. Like, these teams, to me, are very similar. They play gritty style of basketball. Jalen Suggs seems like he was playing lockdown defense on LaMelo, your favorite point guard, or not favorite point guard, yesterday. So I do want to see him and Cade match up against each other, how that's going to look. And I also really am interested to just see how Cade and Paolo, even though they might not be matched up, like, guarding each other, things like that, because of the size difference. These are 2 former number 1 picks, have a lot of expectations.
Back to back, too.
Exactly. So there's just going to be, and they're very ball dominant. So I'm just really interested to see how that's going to work. And Coty, what's your over under for how many fights happen in this series? Like,
I don't. The question should be which player, because I think both teams have a very small margin where they can get away fighting each other. I mean, it's going to be a physical series. However, the Pistons have one guy on the roster who, I mean, if he sneezes on somebody and leaves a booger, then they're going to kick him out and suspend him for the rest of the series. So, I don't want to take it that far. I think both of these teams, it's going to be physical, but I think they're going to have an opportunity to, understand that everybody that comes off the bench and all 10 players who are going to be starting, they understand how important they're going to be, not just for their respective teams, but for the series as well. So, I think, as best as possible, they're going to be on their best behavior. But Tarohn, I do want to ask you this. Give me one reason why you believe the Pistons have the upper hand, and then give me a negative about the Pistons going into the series where you might think, if they are unable to do X, Y, and Z, this might be a detriment for them moving forward.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say the thing you talked a lot about and we talked a lot about throughout, this podcast, and that's just their biggest advantage, I feel like, is consistency. It doesn't matter who's in the lineup. This team has been the best team in the East. And to me, with, the stuff they were dealing with at the end and, all that kind of stuff, they've been the most consistent team to me, even more so than, the Spurs and OKC, even though they have better records. I just have been more impressed with this team just all throughout the season. So I would say that's the biggest thing. And we said Orlando doesn't really have that. So I think that's their biggest advantage. And just being together, there's core. They didn't make any trades at the deadline. They held on to this team, basically from last year since JB and Trajan have took over. So I would just say consistency is my biggest thing. And my biggest concern, for the Pistons is just shooting. Like, I know they looked a lot better toward the end of the season. Like, their stats look better. We've seen Kevin Huerter, Duncan Robinson has done, well shooting threes throughout the season. But we just got a lot more consistent play down the stretch from shooting threes. But it still doesn't feel real in some ways to me at times, and especially against a good defense that has guys like a lot of length, like Jalen Suggs, Anthony Black, Franz, Paolo. All these guys can guard, and I feel like can switch depending on the matchup. So once the paint is clogged up and stuff, I still am a little hesitant to say that the Pistons have enough great shooting to, spread the court out. So that's probably my biggest concern. But what about you? What do you think about those two things?
My biggest concern going into the series for Detroit is the shooting. I 100% agree with you. I mean, you said everything that I was going to say, but I kind of feel like these two teams, they play so similar to the point I truly do believe that three-point shooting is definitely going to be the key attribute in terms of whichever team can get hot more consistently from behind the arc, that's the team that's going to have an opportunity to advance to the second round. And to understand how similar both of these teams are, the Pistons finished the season ranked 8th in points per game, averaging 117 points. The Orlando Magic, they finished 15th at 115 points per game. The Detroit Pistons, they finished this season ranked 17th in three-point shooting 35.6% from behind the arc. The Orlando Magic, they finished 27th, but they shot 34.1% from behind the arc. Both of these teams, as I mentioned early on in the show, they like to play inside out. Both of these teams have, former number one picks that can take over the game at any time. Both of these teams have very solid, and I think at this point, Jalen Duren, I think he's kind of starting to really elevate himself other than looking at like a quote unquote number 2 option, sort of say. I mean, we saw what he was able to do when K went out for those 11, 12 games with that lung injury. He can definitely lead a team, and you can play through him if you need to. Orlando has that as well, but whichever one of these teams, man, can find a rhythm from behind the arc, I truly believe that's the team that's going to move forward. I have some faith in Duncan Robinson. I have some faith in Kevin Huerter. I have faith in Jenkins. I have faith in Javonte Green. A lot of these guys have proven to us once they get hot, they can get hot and they are unstoppable. However, there's been moments where we have seen them on countless occasions throughout the season finish the game with 4 3-pointers, with 5 3-pointers, with 7 3-pointers made. That's not going to cut it in the playoffs. Yeah, that could work against when you're playing against teams like the Brooklyn Nets and the New Orleans Pelicans. But when you're playing a team like the Orlando Magic in the playoffs where every single possession matters, I think that could be a detriment. However, on the flip side of things, I think the Pistons have the biggest advantage when it comes to their bench unit, because part of the reason why Orlando has been so up and down throughout the season, they are not as deep as the Pistons. And Tarohn, I'm not about to go through every single game of how many times somebody off that bench, whether it's Ron, whether it's Jenkins, whether it's Javonte, whether it's, now Kevin Huerter, whether it's Karis LeVert, whether it's Isaiah Stewart. There have been so many guys who were able to come off the bench this season and provide this team with some type of lift, whether it was with their hustle, whether it was on the defensive end, whether it was on the offensive end. It did not matter. This is a deep team. And Coach JB Bickerstaff, Trajan, all of the players, the coaching staff, everybody have talked about and raved about how deep this team has been ever since training camp. I said it once and I said it again. When we heard it on media day, we just thought that was, oh, that's cute. They believe in everybody. But now it's part of, if not the main reason why they won 60 games this season. And look, to understand the big gap difference between the Magic bench and the Pistons bench. The Pistons finished the regular season with their bench unit scoring an average of 41 points per game. The Magic 31 points per game. So those 10 points, that 10 points difference between both reserve units can really be big and beneficial for the Pistons moving forward. Before we go, I do want to share what Coach JB Bickerstaff had to say about the Pistons first round matchup against the Magic.
I mean, obviously, they want to attack the painted area, get to the free throw line. The individual guys that they have that can create offense, the physicality they play with on the defensive end of the floor, all things we have to be prepared.
All right, Tarohn, really quick, before we go, give me your prediction. What it looking like?
I think history repeats itself, and I'm not talking about, because I thought the last time they played was in 2003, so I don't have any recollection of like them playing back there with Tracy and going to game.
Well, you say, I hope that's not the history you're talking about, because they had to come back from 3-1 down, which, I mean, Tracy in that series, I mean, what was it from game 1 to game 5 or whatever? That man was averaging like 40 points per game. And then everyone knows a story. They switched, they put Tayshaun Prince on him. He barely averaged 20, and the Pistons were able to come back from 3-1. So I hope you're not talking about history repeating itself then.
No, I'm talking about the actual last time they played, which is in 2008. They beat the Magic in 5 games. I think 5
Young Dwight, I remember that.
To be the series. And I just wanted to throw these couple things at you. I think the biggest thing this series is going to come down to is fast break points. I think that's how the Magic won that game yesterday. Just it felt like all the loose balls, Orlando was getting it. Jalen Suggs was throwing it to someone, in the fast break. So I think this series is going to come down to fast break points, steals, like we talked about, defense, things like that. But when it's all said and done, I think this series is over in 5 games.
Gotcha. You say 5. I'm gonna go 5 as well, but I think it's gonna be a close 5. Because I want to say the 2 games because they split their season series 2-2. But like I mentioned, there was moments where both teams were, somebody was missing somebody. There was games where Paulo didn't play. There was games where Cade didn't play. There might have been a game where JD didn't play. But I want to say there was at least 2 games where both teams were healthy and they split that. Both of these teams are very similar. It's going to be a fun, competitive, a long series. Make sure y'all eat before y'all come to the game real good, because if the game start at 6:30, it probably won't be over until 11. So let's just go ahead and say that. That's just regulation, and I'm not over exaggerating. Like the last game that they played a couple weeks ago in Orlando, a game that they lost, that second quarter, me and my colleague Omar, we were sitting next to each other. And Tarohn, listeners and viewers, I swear, that second quarter, there were so many fouls being called to the point it felt like that quarter alone took about an hour and a half. I'm not lying. And I'm just like, man, just make sure you get some good sleep. If you take a pregame nap or whatever the case might be, just make sure you're in for a very long, drawn-out game. But overall, man, when I just think of, that the Pistons have not only been more consistent, but they have the advantage in terms of the coaching standpoint. Even though I love Jamal Mosley, I think he's one of the best offensive-minded. Matter of fact, I think he's one of the best coaches in the NBA in general in terms of X's and O's. However, there's been some disconnect between him and his players. However, everybody in that locker room loves JB. And if all else fail, they're going to just go out there and play hard for him. And that might still a game or 2 in their favor. But knowing that, the vibes and everything are better around the Pistons, they are a better team, 60 wins. I'm going to go Pistons in 5, but every single game is going to be close. It's going to be close. So
Coty,
Ron, go ahead.
I just thought of this. So I agree with that part, like being said, like just everyone's been kind of, I feel like there's been so many coaches floated out for the Magic. People have just been ready to count this team out, and especially against the Hornets, I think everyone thought they were going to be the team. But, Mosley, proved it, and this is going to be a good series. But something that you been mentioning a lot that really I've been wondering a lot about is the Pistons' depth and all that stuff, which has been great. They have had one of the best benches throughout the season. But do you think that matters in the playoffs? And what I mean by that is, how much so do you think depth matters in the playoffs? Not like injuries aside, like, because you know how teams shorten their rotations all the time and go down to maybe 8 players, 7 players, just depending on their team. But with the Pistons bench being one of their strongest assets, do you think they go into that trend of kind of cutting down their bench a little bit? Or do you think they continue to do this kind of 2-platoon kind of thing where they just have 5 substitutions at points? Like, you know, they don't really do that often.
Yeah.
They at least play like 10 guys, stuff like that. So what's your thoughts on that?
There's 2 ways I'm looking at that. One, it all comes down to Coach JB Bickerstaff growth. I know coming out of Cleveland, that was one of the biggest knocks that, you know, fans and other analysts and reporters had during his time in Cleveland. They said, you know, he uses a lot of players throughout the regular season, but in the playoffs, he shortened the rotation. He holds a very tight rotation, and they felt that there were moments where he could have went to this player and that player and this player. However, he continued to, you know, be part of the narrative, having a tight rotation. It's something I heard, and we all witnessed it last year against the New York Knicks. Now, I get it, you know, with not having Stu and not having Ivy at the time, you know, that basically, you know, changed up everything in terms of the amount of guys that he actually trusts. However, that Pistons team last year was not as deep as this team is this year. And like I mentioned, Tarohn, this team won 60 games. Majority of that was literally just due to the fact that you had an opportunity to play 10, 11, and 12 guys. And it wasn't just 10 random 10, 11, 12 guys that you just pulling all willy-nilly. No, they all knew their role. I mean, when you take a look at somebody like a Paul Reed, and I wrote about this at least 3 or 4 times this season in terms of Paul Reed, like, he is literally your unsung hero, and he understands his role. He understands that there might be 3 games where he might get a DNP. There might be a game where he only touched the court for 5 minutes, but he also know there's going to be a game where he's going to play 15 or more minutes. There's going to be a game where he's going to be starting. And when he's in those moments, knowing his role and understanding it, he won this team some games. Same thing with Dennis Jenkins. Same thing with Ron Hollis. Same thing with Javonte Green. Like, I don't want to see Coach cut back on the number of players that he used throughout the regular season in the playoffs. I'm telling you, their depth in this bench unit is part of the reason why I think they're going to win this game in 5. But I'm here to tell you, Tarohn, listeners and viewers, if Coach do not stay true to playing however many players he want and having faith in everybody, and he start cutting that rotation, let's say you cut that rotation down to 6, 7, maybe 8 guys, then I think this series got a possibility to go to 7. And we all know once a series get to game 7, anything's possible. So yeah, it all depends on Coach JB Bickerstaff at this moment.
Cool.
But with that being said, that's going to conclude another installment of the Injury Room of Detroit Piston podcast, brought to you by Varsity Ford of Ann Arbor. As always, I'm your host, Pistons beat writer Coty M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on all your social media platforms at Coty Davis _24. Once again, it's Coty COTY DAVIS _24.
And make sure you guys follow me on all social media platforms at Tarohn Finley, TAROHN FINLEY. Once again, TAROHN FINLEY.
Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.
Peace.